Raymond Cole was 39 years old, and until that cold February morning in Memphis, he believed his father was a humble postal worker, and his wife of 11 years was the woman he built his life around. He was a high school history teacher who drove a used car, coached basketball after school, and never once complained about what he didn't have. The kind of man everyone underestimated. The kind of man no one watched closely. That morning, Raymond carried his father's casket on his shoulders, one of 6 pallbearers, holding his grief together with both hands because someone had to. At the graveside reception, his wife Denise pulled him into a quiet corridor and handed him a manila envelope. Inside was a divorce petition she had filed 3 days earlier, while he was arranging the funeral flowers, while he was writing his father's obituary. She looked at him the way you look at something you've already discarded, and Raymond felt 11 years collapse into a single moment of terrible clarity. What neither Denise nor anyone else in that fellowship hall could have known was what Walter Cole's attorney was preparing to read 2 days later, and what Raymond was already, quietly, beginning to understand. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Raymond stood in the serving line, carefully spooning green beans onto the plates of elderly church members who had come to pay their respects. The warmth of the fellowship hall contrasted with the bitter February cold outside, and the familiar scent of church lady casseroles filled the air. His shoulders still ached from carrying his father's casket, but he kept his movements steady and his face composed. Mrs. Henderson, who'd lived 3 doors down from them for 30 years, touched his arm as he served her. "Your daddy was so proud of you, Raymond, always talking about his son, the teacher, making such a difference with those kids. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." Raymond managed a small smile, genuine despite his exhaustion. "Daddy loved having you as a neighbor." He continued down the line, making sure everyone had enough food, just as he'd made sure there were enough chairs, enough parking spaces, enough tissues in the church bathroom. His mother sat at a corner table with her sister, barely touching the food on her plate. Raymond had made sure she ate breakfast that morning, knowing she would forget otherwise. 3 of his students had come to the service: Marcus, DeAndre, and Jamal from his AP history class. They stood awkwardly near the dessert table now, wearing their Sunday best, looking unsure whether they should approach their teacher in this moment. Raymond caught Marcus's eye and nodded, letting him know it was okay to be there. The serving spoon felt heavy in his hand. Everything felt heavy today. He remembered his father's voice from years ago. "A man carries what he needs to carry, son. No more, no less." Walter Cole had carried mail for 32 years without complaint, walked his route in rain and heat, knew every address by heart. Raymond wondered if his father had known this would be his last lesson, teaching his son how to carry weight with dignity. Devin appeared beside him, taking over the cornbread station without being asked. That was Devin's way, showing up where he was needed. No fanfare required. They worked side by side for a few minutes in comfortable silence. "You're holding up," Devin said quietly, his voice pitched just for Raymond's ears. Raymond's hand stayed steady as he filled another plate. "I don't have a choice." Across the fellowship hall, he caught sight of Denise. She stood near the entrance, elegant in her black dress, her composure perfect as always. Something about her stillness made him uneasy. It reminded him of the way she went quiet before delivering bad news at home. She had been checking her phone throughout the service, standing apart from his mother and the other family members. Her brother Terry hovered near the door, hands in his pockets, watching. Raymond had always found Terry's presence at family events slightly off, like a puzzle piece that almost fit but didn't quite click into place. Today, Terry's attention seemed especially focused, his usual fake warmth replaced by something more calculated. Denise's eyes met Raymond's across the room. She gave him a small gesture, that familiar tilt of her head that meant, "Come here." Even in his grief, even in this sacred space of mourning, she expected him to respond to her silent summons. The serving spoon felt heavier in his hand. He remembered his father saying once, "A man who needs people to know what he's worth has already lost something important." At the time, Raymond had taken it as wisdom about character. He hadn't understood it might have been something else, a philosophy about power, about patience, about knowing when to move and when to stay still. Mrs. Johnson approached the serving line, her walker clicking against the linoleum floor. Raymond set the spoon down carefully, making sure it wouldn't slip into the green beans. He would go to Denise in a moment. Whatever she needed to say couldn't be more important than making sure Mrs. Johnson, who had brought his family dinner every Sunday for a month after his grandmother died, had enough food on her plate. Devon caught his eye, a silent question in his expression. Raymond gave him a slight nod. They had known each other long enough that words weren't always necessary. Devon would keep the line moving. Raymond would handle whatever was coming next. That's what they did. Showed up, stayed steady, carried what needed carrying. Raymond followed Denise down the corridor near the kitchen, the sounds of the reception fading with each step. Steam from industrial dishwashers mixed with the lingering scent of coffee and funeral casseroles. Through the fellowship hall doorway, he could see Terry standing near the exit, hands tucked in his pockets, watching their direction with unusual intensity. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Denise's face. She wore the expression Raymond had seen countless times over 11 years of marriage, that careful blankness that meant she had already made up her mind about something and was simply waiting for him to understand what she had decided. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carrying that familiar flatness, the same tone she had used when she decided they should sell his grandfather's truck, when she wanted to move to a bigger house they couldn't afford, when she had already settled on a course of action and was merely informing him of it. Raymond stood quietly, his shoulders still aching from carrying his father's casket. The weight of the morning pressed against him. The funeral service, his mother's grief, the faces of his students who had come to pay respects, the endless small duties of organizing a proper goodbye. He waited, watching Denise reach into her oversized black purse. The corridor felt too narrow suddenly, the institutional beige walls closing in. From the fellowship hall came the muffled sounds of life continuing. Elderly church ladies discussing recipes, his mother's sister trying to convince her to eat something, the clink of silverware against paper plates. All of it seemed distant now, separated from this moment by more than just walls. Denise's hand emerged with a manila envelope. The overhead lights caught the brass clasps, making them gleam dully. She held it out to him with the same efficiency she used for handling HR paperwork at her corporate job. Clinical, detached, a transaction to be completed. Raymond took the envelope. The paper felt warm from being in her purse, but his fingers had gone cold. He opened the clasp with steady hands that belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't standing in a church corridor on the day of his father's funeral, someone who wasn't about to have his world shift again. The documents inside were crisp, official, black ink on white paper, legal language that reduced 11 years to paragraphs and bullet points. Divorce petition, filed 3 days ago in Shelby County. The words swam before his eyes. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, spousal support. She wanted the house, half his teacher's pension, monthly payments. The corridor lights buzzed. The dishwashers hissed. Somewhere in the fellowship hall, Mrs. Henderson was probably telling someone how much Walter Cole had loved his son, the teacher. Raymond stood completely still, the kind of stillness that comes when grief and shock collide, when the mind needs absolute quiet to process what the heart already knows. He looked at Denise, really looked at her. The careful makeup, the perfectly pressed dress, the practiced, neutral expression. He saw relief in her eyes, not sadness, not regret, not even the decency of discomfort. Just relief, like someone finally setting down a heavy bag they'd been carrying too long. The question came from somewhere deep and quiet. "You couldn't wait until after we buried him?" "It's been over for a long time, Raymond," Denise said, her voice carrying that HR professional's blend of firmness and false compassion. "I'm just the first one to say it out loud." She turned and walked back toward the fellowship hall, her heels clicking against the linoleum. Raymond watched her go, the manila envelope heavy in his hands. Through the doorway, he saw Terry step away from his observation post, following his sister back into the crowd like a shadow detaching itself from the wall. The corridor held its institutional silence. Raymond stood alone with the papers, with the weight of the morning, with the collision of endings. He heard footsteps approaching, the familiar cadence of Devon's walk. His friend appeared in the doorway, took in the scene with one glance, and moved closer. "Ray?" Devon's voice carried genuine concern, not the manufactured kind Denise had perfected. Raymond held up the envelope, explained in quiet words what it contained. Devon's face darkened with each detail, his hands clenching into fists, but Raymond barely noticed. His mind was already moving, processing, cataloging details he would examine later when he had the luxury of time. "Let me take you home, man," Devon offered. "This is too much for one day." Raymond shook his head. He tucked the envelope into his suit jacket, straightened his tie, and looked toward the fellowship hall. There are still people who need to pay their respects. Mother needs help with the guests. Tables will need folding when it's done. He moved back toward the reception, Devon falling into step beside him. For the next 2 hours, Raymond would greet every guest, accept every condolence, hug every elderly woman who had loved his father. He would make sure his mother ate something. He would thank the church ladies for the food, and when it was over, he would stay and help fold the tables. Not because he was passive, not because he was in denial, but because he was processing every detail, every moment, every piece of information that would matter later when it was time to move. 2 days after the funeral, Raymond sat at the kitchen table in the pre-dawn darkness, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. The house had developed new patterns since the funeral. Denise leaving for work early, Raymond timing his morning routine to avoid crossing paths, nights spent in separate orbits with the spare bedroom door closed. They exchanged words only when necessary. Brief conversations about mail or groceries that felt like radio transmissions from distant stations. His phone buzzed against the table. An email from Attorney Gerald Okafor's office requesting the family's presence for the formal reading of Walter Cole's will. Raymond stared at the screen, remembering his father's practicality. There wouldn't be much to discuss. Maybe a small life insurance policy, the old Buick, whatever remained in Walter's savings after 32 years of carrying mail. Simple things that matched the simple life his father had lived. Footsteps on the stairs announced Denise's descent. She appeared in her corporate uniform, charcoal skirt suit, pearls, heels that announced authority with each step. Raymond looked up from his phone. "Okafor wants to schedule the will reading," he said, his voice neutral. "You don't need to attend. It won't take long." Denise paused in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. "I have a legal interest in any inheritance as your spouse." Her tone carried that careful blend of assertion and reasonableness she used in HR meeting. "The divorce isn't final. I should be there." Raymond nodded once, keeping his face still. He noted, with the same quiet attention he gave to everything now, how quickly she had agreed to come. "Thursday at 2, he said. "Downtown office." The days until Thursday moved like syrup. Raymond taught his classes, ran basketball practice, graded papers, the routine of his life continuing while something else assembled itself in the back of his mind, collecting details and observations the way his father had collected spare parts in carefully labeled jars in the garage. Thursday arrived clear and cold. Raymond drove separately from Denise, following the familiar grid of downtown Memphis streets to Okafor's office building. His mother's car was already parked outside. Her sister Claudette had driven her. Through the lobby windows, he saw Terry's black SUV idling across the street, conspicuous in its attempt to be inconspicuous. The elevator carried them to the 12th floor. Okafor's office suite spoke of old money and institutional permanence. Dark wood, leather chairs, framed maps of Memphis from the steamboat era. The conference room windows offered a view of the Mississippi River sliding past like liquid steel under the February sky. Okafor himself was exactly what Raymond expected from his father's choice of attorney. Meticulous, unflappable, with the precise movements of someone who had been handling complex matters for decades. He arranged them around the table with practiced efficiency. Raymond, Loretta, Claudette, Denise. Legal folders lay before him like playing cards waiting to be dealt. "Before we begin," Okafor said, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony, "I want to acknowledge that Walter Cole left very specific instructions about how this meeting should proceed." He opened the first folder. "We'll start with the life insurance policy." Raymond watched his mother's hands fold together on the table. "The policy pays $1.2 million, Okafor continued, "to Loretta Cole in full." Claudette's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. Raymond saw Denise's posture shift slightly. "Next," Okafor said, opening a second folder, "we have a residential property portfolio held in a shell company. 4 properties across Memphis and Nashville. Total current market value of $4.1 million. He looked directly at Raymond. "To Raymond Cole, in full." The air in the room changed. Raymond felt it like a pressure drop before a storm. His father, the postal worker who drove a dying Buick, who clipped coupons and bought store-brand coffee, had somehow accumulated millions in real estate. But Okafor wasn't finished. "Finally," he said, opening the last folder, "we come to Walter Cole's founding partnership stake in Meridian Freight Solutions, LLC. Incorporated 1991. Current operations in 7 southeastern states." He paused, letting the information settle. Walter held 51% equity. The company's current valuation is $620 million. His stake, approximately $316 million. Complete silence filled the conference room. Raymond watched Denise's face move through distinct phases. Disbelief as the numbers registered. Rapid calculation as she processed their meaning. And finally, written in every line of her features, the dawning horror of someone watching their own miscalculation become irreversible. Okafor lifted a single sheet of paper. Walter's final instruction reads, "To my son Raymond, who never asked me for anything, and therefore never required me to lie to him, everything, with the instruction that he protect it the way I protected it, quietly and with patience." The drive home unfolded in strange new light. Denise's voice carried a warmth Raymond hadn't heard in months. She spoke about acting in haste, about grief making people do strange things. She suggested they should slow down, maybe see a counselor before making permanent decisions. "You're right," Raymond said, his voice gentle. "Let's slow down." He was lying with every word, and the lie felt like putting on a comfortable old coat. Raymond woke before dawn, the house silent except for the furnace humming against the February cold. He had slept maybe 3 hours, his mind cycling through calculations and implications, while Denise's measured breathing carried through the wall from their bedroom, soon to be her bedroom alone. He made coffee in the dark kitchen, watching the sky gradually reveal itself through the window. At precisely 6:30 a.m., when he knew Okafor would be starting his day, Raymond dialed the number saved in his phone. "Mr. Cole," Okafor answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the same unflappable precision from yesterday's reading. "I've been expecting your call." "3 questions," Raymond said, keeping his voice low, though Denise wouldn't wake for another hour. "First, what's the timeline for the estate transfer?" Standard processing is 90 to 120 days, Okafor replied. Your father's documentation is meticulous, which helps, but there are regulatory requirements we cannot accelerate. Raymond nodded, making a note in the small leather-bound notebook his father had given him years ago. Second question. Does Denise's divorce filing create any legal complications with the inheritance? An intelligent question, Okafor said, and Raymond heard paper rustling through the line. The filing would only create potential marital asset claims if the marriage remains intact during the transfer period. This is precisely why she filed before the reading and is now attempting to withdraw. She was advised to establish a claim before the assets became known. But, Raymond prompted, hearing the qualification in Okafor's tone, but your father anticipated this possibility with extraordinary foresight. The trust structure predates your marriage by 15 years. The residential properties and the Meridian equity stake are held in trust with you as sole beneficiary. Under Tennessee law, they cannot be classified as marital assets. Raymond wrote this down carefully, his father's fountain pen moving across the page. Her attorney will argue otherwise. Her attorney will fail, Okafor said simply. Walter Cole built these structures to withstand exactly this kind of challenge. I know, because I helped him build them. The kitchen had lightened enough that Raymond could see his reflection in the window, his father's posture, his mother's eyes, both of them watching him process information the way they had taught him, quietly, thoroughly, without reaction. Third question, Raymond said. Who else knew about the money? All of it? Or even part of it? Okafor's pause carried weight. Your mother knew everything. She had to. She was integral to maintaining the appearance your father chose to project. She never wavered in 31 years. And one other person knew the general shape of things, though not the full amount. Another pause. Terry Whitfield. Raymond's pen stopped moving. Denise's brother. Yes. He made inquiries through family channels over the years. Your father was aware of them. The timing of your wife's divorce filing and her immediate attempt to withdraw it after the reading suggests Terry advised her to establish a claim before the estate became known. Raymond sat with this information, letting it settle into place like a key finding its lock. 11 years of marriage shifted and realigned themselves in his mind. Conversations took on new meaning. Reactions revealed different motivations. He remembered, with perfect clarity, an argument 3 years ago. Denise wanted to move to a bigger house in a different neighborhood. Raymond had explained, patiently, that their budget couldn't support it. Her fury had lasted weeks. Not the flash and fade of normal disappointment, but a slow, burning rage that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Now, he understood. She wasn't angry about the house. She wasn't even angry about their budget. She was angry because Terry had told her there was money somewhere, and she couldn't understand why it wasn't appearing. She had been waiting for Walter Cole's hidden resources to surface, and his sustained silence felt like personal denial. Thank you, Raymond said to Okafor. You've been very helpful. Your father trusted you would ask the right questions, Okafor replied. He was correct. After hanging up, Raymond opened his laptop, created a new document, titled it simply Ledger. He began entering information in precise chronological order. Dates, conversations, incidents, patterns that emerged only in retrospect. Terry's visits, Denise's careful questions about Walter's finances, the house argument, the gradual shift in her attitude toward Raymond's teaching career. The sun climbed higher outside the kitchen window. Soon Denise would wake, would come downstairs performing warmth and reconciliation, would continue believing she was the one making careful plans. The next morning, Raymond sat at his desk in the empty classroom before first period, his father's leather notebook open beside his laptop. Denise had made chicken piccata for dinner the night before. suggesting between bites that maybe they should try couples counseling, work through this rough patch. Raymond had nodded, even smiled, and helped with the dishes afterward. Now, in the quiet of his classroom where he'd taught history for 15 years, he began his own careful documentation. He called Devin, who always arrived early to review game footage with the basketball team. "Remember Denise's HR conference in Nashville last spring?" Raymond asked without preamble. "The one where you covered my afternoon classes that week?" "Yeah, Thursday and Friday," Devin said. "Your AP World History kids tried to convince me the Mongols invented pizza. Why?" "Just confirming the dates," Raymond said, his voice neutral. He opened his laptop and logged into their joint credit card account. He had always managed their finances, tracked their spending, balanced their budget. Denise had found this admirable early in their marriage, calling him responsible. Later, she called it controlling. He found the statement from 14 months ago. The hotel charge jumped out immediately. Not the Marriott near the convention center where the HR summit was held, but the Thompson Nashville, a boutique hotel 20 blocks away. Below that, a dinner charge from the Oak Room, $340. Raymond wrote both entries in his notebook, then opened a new tab and mapped the distance between the convention hotel and where Denise had actually stayed. 20-minute walk, 5-minute drive. No logical reason to book separate accommodations unless privacy was the goal. The Oak Room's website showed an upscale steakhouse with private dining alcoves and a wine list that explained the bill. Denise didn't spend $340 on dinner alone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Marcus Williams's number. Marcus had graduated 5 years ago, had played point guard on Raymond's team, and now worked valet at the Oak Room while taking night classes at Memphis State. "Coach Cole?" Marcus answered, surprise in his voice. "Everything okay?" "Quick question, Marcus. Last spring, probably March or April, did you happen to work a night when a woman came in, about 5'8", wearing business clothes, light brown skin?" "Would have been dining with someone." A pause. "Yeah, actually. I remember because she tipped well, and the guy she was with had this black BMW 5 Series, one of those folks who tells you how to park their car like you've never seen one before." Raymond's pen moved steadily across the page. "Tall guy?" "Yeah, 6'1" maybe. Dark complexion. Kept checking his watch like he was somebody important." "Thanks, Marcus. How's school?" They talked basketball for another minute before hanging up. Raymond opened his phone carrier's website and logged into their family plan account. His name, his credit card on autopay. He downloaded 14 months of detailed call records into a spreadsheet. The pattern emerged immediately. A single number appeared 847 times, calls and texts, mostly during business hours or late at night. Some lasting minutes, others for over an hour. He copied the number into a separate document. Devin's wife, Angela, worked for a major HR software company. She had access to their proprietary database for employment verification searches. Raymond texted Devin, "Need a reverse lookup on a phone number. Professional matter. Can Angela help?" The response came 40 minutes later, while Raymond was teaching his second period class about the civil rights movement. A name, a title, a LinkedIn profile link. Deshaun Pruitt, Regional Sales Director at Logistics Solutions Partners, age 44. During his planning period, Raymond studied Deshaun's LinkedIn photo. Expensive suit, practiced smile, the manufactured confidence of someone who had spent years crafting an image of success. His tagline read, "Playing the long game in an industry of short-term thinkers." Raymond returned to the phone records, this time searching for Terry's number. There, 3 calls in the 72 hours before the funeral. 18 minutes, 24 minutes, 31 minutes. The timing wasn't random. Terry knew the will reading was coming through family channels. He had advised Denise to file immediately before the estate became known, to establish a marital claim on any inheritance that might surface. The divorce papers at the funeral weren't an emotional impulse. They were a calculated financial strategy, executed precisely when Terry thought it would give Denise maximum leverage. She had served Raymond divorce papers over his father's coffin, not out of desperation or pain, but out of pure strategic timing. Raymond opened his ledger document and began entering the new information in clean, chronological order. The hotel charges, the restaurant bill, Marcus's confirmation, the phone records, the calls with Terry. Each entry another piece of evidence, another thread in the pattern he was assembling with his father's methodical patience. The bell rang for fourth period. Students began filing in, taking their seats, pulling out their textbook. Raymond closed his laptop, uncapped his dry erase marker, and wrote on the board, Memphis, 1968, the sanitation workers' strike. The morning air held a chill as Raymond drove through the familiar streets of his childhood neighborhood. The modest houses with their well-kept yards hadn't changed much in 30 years. His mother's home, the same one he'd grown up in, stood exactly as it always had, its red brick facade weathered but dignified, like Loretta herself. She was already on the back porch when he pulled into the driveway, 2 coffee cups waiting on the small table beside her favorite wicker chair. Raymond took the steps slowly, feeling the weight of what he needed to ask settle into his bones. "I made it the way you like it," Loretta said, gesturing to the steaming cup. "Little cream, no sugar." Raymond sat down, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic. The backyard stretched out before them, the old swing set he'd played on still standing sentinel near the fence. His father had installed it himself one Saturday morning in 1988. "Mama," he said quietly, "I need to know about Daddy." Loretta's hands stilled on her coffee cup. She looked out at the yard, at the morning light catching the dew on the grass. Raymond told her everything. The trust structures Okafor had explained, Terry's involvement in timing the divorce filing, the affair he'd uncovered. He kept his voice steady, factual. When he finished, silence stretched between them. "Your daddy," Loretta began, then paused to steady her voice, "was the most patient man I ever knew, and the smartest, though he never needed anyone to know it." She settled back in her chair, her eyes distant with memory. In 1987, there was this businessman on his route named Herschel Greer. White man, lived alone in that big house on Highland Street. He was dying of cancer, no family left. Your daddy would bring his mail right to the door most days, talk with him a while. Herschel said Walter was the only person who treated him like a man instead of a dying one. Raymond listened, remembering how his father would sometimes come home later than usual from his route, saying he'd had extra stops to make. Herschel had bought this big piece of land out past Cordova in the 70s. Everyone thought he was crazy. Nothing out there but trees and dirt roads. But in '88 they announced that interstate expansion. Loretta shook her head, smiling slightly. That worthless land suddenly wasn't so worthless. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. Herschel sold it all. Millions of dollars. And he split it right down the middle with your daddy. Said Walter was the only real friend he had left in the world. That money became the investment in Meridian Freight. 2 brothers starting up. Needed a silent partner with capital. Your daddy saw something in them. Same way Herschel saw something in him. Raymond thought about his father driving that postal route for 20 more years after becoming a millionaire, delivering mail in rain and heat, coming home tired, never complaining. He kept working, Loretta said, reading his thoughts, because he believed money that shows itself becomes money other people try to take. He watched how wealth changed people, made them targets. He wanted more for you than that. She reached over and touched Raymond's hand. He never told you because he wanted you to become yourself first. He left those instructions with Attorney Okafor. Everything would come to you only after you'd proven by living your own life, that you were the kind of man who wouldn't be ruined by it. Raymond sat perfectly still, feeling the weight of his father's trust settle over him like a mantle. He watched me the whole time. He was so proud of you, Loretta said softly, her eyes bright with tears. Every single day. The way you teach those children, the way you handle yourself. He'd say to me, "Look at our boy, Loretta. He's building something real." Before the emotion could overwhelm him, Raymond asked the final question he'd come with. "Did Denise ever ask you about Daddy's money?" Loretta's expression shifted, a shadow crossing her face. 6 years into your marriage. Christmas dinner. She was pouring wine, acting casual, and she asked if your daddy had any investments tucked away somewhere. Asked if he had any specific plans for you. Loretta shook her head. I thought it was just conversation. I said no, and changed the subject. Raymond nodded, absorbing this last piece. He could see it clearly. Denise moving around the holiday table, wine bottle in hand, voice carefully modulated to sound merely curious. Another entry for his ledger, another thread in the pattern that had been forming for years while he taught history and coached basketball and believed in a marriage that had been a calculation from the start. Raymond moved through the week like a man sleepwalking, but his eyes were wide open. He ate dinner across from Denise each evening, asking about her meetings, her projects, maintaining the perfect image of a husband considering reconciliation. When she touched his hand across the table, he didn't flinch. When she suggested they try that new Italian place on Saturday, he smiled and said that sounded nice. Behind this carefully constructed normalcy, 5 gears turned in perfect synchronization. The first gear. On Tuesday morning, Raymond met with Caroline Bishop, an estate attorney who specialized in trust law and asset protection. Her office overlooked the Memphis skyline, and her reputation for handling complex inheritance cases made her exactly what Raymond needed. He laid out the situation with surgical precision, the trust structures, the timing of Denise's filing, Terry's involvement. The good news, Bishop said, reviewing the documents, is that your father's planning was impeccable. The trust predates your marriage by 15 years. We'll file preemptive motions establishing the timeline and the separate nature of these assets. She looked up at Raymond. Your wife's attorney will try to argue community property principles, but they won't get traction. The structure is too clean. The second gear engaged Wednesday afternoon at Meridian Freight Solutions downtown headquarters. The board of directors had convened a special meeting to meet their new majority stakeholder. They expected a grieving school teacher overwhelmed by sudden wealth. What they got was Raymond Cole, who had spent 3 nights studying every operational document Okafor provided. The CFO finished his presentation on Q1 projections, and Raymond raised his hand. I noticed the Nashville terminal shows a 22% increase in processing times during peak hours. Have we analyzed whether that's a staffing issue or an infrastructure bottleneck? The room's energy shifted. The CFO blinked. Raymond continued, and looking at the fuel hedging strategy, we're exposed on the futures contracts if diesel drops below 3.85 in Q3. What's our downside protection plan? By his third question, about optimization algorithms in the routing software, the board members were exchanging glances. This was not the conversation they had prepared for. The third gear moved silently through financial channels. Raymond, working through a holding company Okafor helped establish, purchased Terry's $380,000 business debt from the private lender. The transaction was clean, legal, and completely opaque. Terry would continue making his minimum payments, unaware that his brother-in-law now held the note that could destroy him. The fourth gear started turning on Thursday morning when Raymond, acting as majority stakeholder, initiated a comprehensive vendor review at Meridian. It was standard governance practice for new ownership, examining every partnership, every contract, every performance metric across the company's operations. The operations team approached their task methodically. They analyzed delivery times, customer satisfaction scores, and compliance records for every third-party sales relationship in Meridian's network. Deshaun Pruitt's firm held a regional sales partnership that depended heavily on Meridian's business. The review surfaced clear performance gaps in his territory, consistent late deliveries, missed targets, and multiple client complaints that never reached senior management. The documentation was thorough and damning. Meridian's operations director recommended termination of the partnership based purely on performance metrics. The paperwork moved through channels, each signature adding weight to an entirely legitimate business decision. Raymond's name appeared nowhere in the process. The fifth and final gear engaged Friday evening. Raymond sat at his desk, logged into the cloud storage account he and Denise had shared for years. She had forgotten he had access, or perhaps never considered him technical enough to look. In a folder labeled Personal Archive, he found a PDF she had scanned and saved, message threads between her and Deshaun from 2022. The messages told a story that made Raymond's hands go cold. That spring, he had been offered the vice principal position at Madison High. The salary bump would have been significant. Deshaun, it seemed, had made that promotion a condition of leaving his own marriage for Denise. Once R takes the upgrade, we can move forward, Deshaun had written. I need to know the financial picture is solid. When Raymond chose to stay in the classroom, believing his best work happened with students, the messages turned tense. Deshaun pulled back. Denise spent the next 3 years rebuilding his interest, promising Raymond would eventually see the light and move into administration. She hadn't simply been unfaithful. She had been running parallel auditions, testing Raymond's potential value while keeping Deshaun engaged as his replacement. All those conversations about career advancement, about living up to his potential, they weren't about Raymond's growth. They were about Deshaun's conditions. Raymond read the thread twice, absorbing every word. He closed the laptop with steady hands, walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water and drank it slowly, looking out at the backyard where he had grilled dinner for Denise's birthday just 2 months ago. He returned to his office and opened his ledger one final time. The last entry would be the most important, not because it revealed new betrayal, but because it showed how deep the old betrayal went. The Saturday morning sun filled Raymond's living room, casting long shadows across the coffee table where a single manila envelope lay untouched. He had positioned the chairs carefully, Denise and Terry on the couch, Devin in the armchair to his left, himself in the chair that had been his father's, brought over from Loretta's house last week. I appreciate you both coming, Raymond said, his voice steady and quiet. And Devin being here as a friend and witness. He glanced at his phone on the table, set to speaker mode. Attorney Okafor is available if we need any legal clarification. Denise sat forward, hope visible in her posture. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, wearing the blue blouse Raymond had given her for Christmas. I think this is good, Raymond. Us talking like adults. Terry nodded, professional concern on his face. Whatever we can do to help you two work through this. Raymond looked at them both for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice remained calm, almost gentle. I want to start with Deshaun Pruitt. The name landed like a stone in still water. Denise's breath caught. Terry's jaw tightened, the tell Raymond had been watching for. Regional sales director at Matthews Logistics, drives a dark BMW, likes expensive restaurants, particularly in Nashville. Raymond's eyes never left Terry's face. You've known about him for how long? Raymond, I don't, Denise started. Raymond raised one hand, palm out. I'm not finished. He reached for his phone, opened a document. 847 calls in 14 months. A hotel room at the Grand Hyatt Nashville, nowhere near the convention center where your HR conference was supposed to be. A $340 dinner at Morton's the same night. He looked at Denise. The valet remembered you, both of you. The silence in the room was absolute. Devin sat perfectly still, witnessing. But That's not really what this meeting is about, Raymond continued. This is about 3 phone calls between you and Terry in the 72 hours before Dad's funeral. This is about the legal strategy you developed together. File for divorce before the will reading. Establish a claim on any inheritance that might surface. He turned to Terry. That was your advice, wasn't it? Your expertise from all those real estate deals? Terry shifted on the couch. You're making assumptions. I'm not assuming anything, Raymond said. I'm telling you what I know. He reached for the manila envelope. Just like I know about the $380,000 you owe to Brighton Capital Partners. He removed a single sheet of paper. Or, should I say, owed. The debt was purchased last week by Cole Holdings, LLC. He placed the demand letter on the coffee table. Full repayment required within 60 days, or we'll pursue all available legal remedies. Terry's face went slack. You can't do that. I already did. Raymond's voice remained level. Just like I already filed the trust documentation showing the assets predate my marriage by 15 years. Just like I already have every message between Denise and Deshawn discussing my vice principal offer. How he would only leave his wife if I took the promotion. How Denise spent 3 years managing his doubts about my earning potential. Denise stood up, tears starting. Raymond, please. Sit down, Raymond said quietly. I need you to hear this next part clearly. She sat. Raymond leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. I loved you completely, and you turned that into a liability in your plans. I want you to know that I know the difference between what we could have been and what you chose. I want you to know it was a choice. His voice softened further. And I want you to know I'm going to be fine. He stood up. Devon rose with him. My attorney will contact you next week, Raymond said to Denise. You can withdraw your divorce petition or not. It doesn't matter now, because I'm filing my own. He looked at Terry. 60 days on the note. I'd suggest starting with your retirement accounts. Raymond walked to the door, Devon following. He did not look back at the house he had shared with Denise for 11 years, did not acknowledge her calling his name as he got into his car. He drove to Devon's house with his hands steady on the wheel, the weight of his father's watch heavy on his wrist, remembering Walter's words, a man who needs people to know what he's worth has already lost something important. Raymond hadn't lost anything important today. He had simply stopped carrying what was never his to hold. The divorce proceedings moved with the steady precision of well-oiled machinery. Denise's attorney filed motion after motion, each one targeting the inherited assets from different angles. They argued community property principles. They cited marriage duration. They attempted to establish Raymond's father's intent through family testimony. Every filing hit the same wall. The trust structure Walter Cole had built 15 years before Raymond ever met Denise. In Okafor's office, Raymond sat quietly while the attorney explained the latest failed motion. The trust's establishment date is unambiguous, Okafor said, his tone matter-of-fact. Your father's documentation was meticulous. There is no valid claim on assets that predate the marriage by this margin. Raymond nodded, remembering his father's patient attention to detail. What are they asking for now? The house, Okafor said. But the title is solely in your name. The mortgage was paid from your individual account. Their argument for equity share is thin. 3 weeks later, the final settlement landed exactly where Raymond knew it would. Denise received her portion of their joint savings account, $44,000, along with her Honda Accord and her personal property. The house stayed with Raymond. She had served divorce papers over his father's coffin for $44,000 and a used car. Terry's reckoning came in Okafor's conference room on a Wednesday morning. He arrived wearing a suit that had fit better before the stress weight, carrying a leather portfolio like armor. Raymond sat at the table in pressed khakis and a blue Oxford shirt, exactly what he'd worn to teach first-period history. The 60 days are up tomorrow, Raymond said quietly. Terry placed the portfolio on the table. I can't pay it all at once. You know that. I know. Raymond pushed a document across the table. 10-year repayment plan. Monthly installments. Interest compounds quarterly. He paused. There's one condition beyond the payment terms. Terry's jaw tightened. What condition? You never contact my mother again. Not for holidays, not for family events, not to check on her well-being. Raymond's voice remained level. You used your position as Denise's brother to probe for financial information for 11 years. That access ends today. Terry stared at the document for a long moment. Then he signed. He had no choice. Deshaun Pruitt's unraveling began with the Meridian vendor review. The performance gaps in his territory, late deliveries, missed targets, unescalated complaints, triggered a cascade. Meridian terminated the partnership. Deshaun's firm, facing significant revenue loss in the region, launched their own internal audit. 6 weeks later, Deshaun sat across from his regional VP and an HR representative, receiving his termination notice and 2 weeks of severance. He signed a non-disparagement agreement because his attorney advised him he had no leverage to negotiate better terms. The job search that followed revealed how thoroughly Deshaun had miscalculated. The Southeast logistics industry operated through networks, relationships, references, shared clients. Meridian Freight Solutions touched them all. 3 different firms conducted preliminary interviews. None advanced his application. Raymond made no calls. His presence in the industry was enough. Then Deshaun's wife found the hotel charge. She was reconciling their credit card statement on a Tuesday morning when she noticed it. A Hyatt charge from 8 months ago that didn't match any of Deshaun's documented travel. She checked his phone while he showered, found the messages, the photos. By that afternoon, she had contacted a divorce attorney. Their state considered infidelity relevant in divorce proceedings. Deshaun, already unemployed and carrying mounting credit card debt, faced negotiations from a position of complete weakness. The leased BMW went back to the dealership. The house, which his wife had purchased primarily with her inheritance and income due to Deshaun's undisclosed credit issues, remained solely with her. Within a month, Deshaun was renting a spare bedroom from a college friend in Cordova, sending resumes into silence, carrying the specific weight of a man who had placed conditions on his mistress's love based on her husband's earning potential, only to discover that the quiet teacher he'd dismissed was worth $300 million more than anyone knew. Raymond had never spoken to him, had never sent a message or made a threat, had never acknowledged Deshaun's existence in any direct way. He had simply become the most significant presence in the industry Deshaun needed to navigate, conducted entirely legitimate business, and allowed gravity to finish what Deshaun's own choices had started, the same way Walter Cole had conducted his life. Invisible but enormously present, letting other people's assumptions become their own undoing. Raymond Cole's classroom hadn't changed. Same maps on the walls, same worn wooden podium, same slight squeak in the third desk of the second row that he kept meaning to fix. What had changed was invisible, exactly the way his father would have wanted it. He stood at the front of his first-period U.S. history class, dress shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, explaining the Civil War's economic aftermath to 30 sophomores who had no idea their teacher reviewed freight logistics reports between grading their papers. I'm not retiring from the thing that made me who my father trusted with all of this. That's how he'd explained it to the Meridian board 3 months ago when they'd suggested a more prominent role. The board members, seasoned executives who expected the standard displays of sudden wealth, couldn't quite understand why a man worth hundreds of millions still wrote hall passes and coached junior varsity basketball. But Raymond understood something they didn't. Wealth was what his father had. Teaching was who his father raised him to be. His new house sat on a tree-lined street in East Memphis, a restored craftsman with deep porches and warm wood trim. Nothing flashy, nothing that announced itself. His neighbors were exactly the kind of people Walter Cole would have appreciated. Jim Marshall, who'd carried mail for 28 years, and Barbara Chen, who'd taught elementary school for 3 decades before retiring. They brought him welcome cookies and asked normal questions about yard maintenance. He helped Jim clear branches after a storm. The Walter Cole Foundation launched quietly with a simple website and a clear mission: full college scholarships for first-generation students from working-class Tennessee families. Raymond had structured the endowment at $15 million, enough to ensure sustainability while maintaining selective standards. The foundation's board included 2 retired teachers, a community college administrator, and Loretta. The first scholarship ceremony was held in the high school auditorium where Raymond taught. 20 students, chosen from hundreds of applications, received their acceptance letters on stage. Loretta sat in the front row wearing a navy dress Raymond had spent 3 weeks convincing her to let him buy. She cried when the first recipient, a young man whose father worked construction, talked about what the opportunity meant. Raymond's classroom routine remained deliberately normal. He arrived at 6:45 each morning, reviewed lesson plans, and taught 3 periods of U.S. history. His students still complained about pop quizzes and asked for extra credit. The only difference was that he now had a dedicated office at Meridian's headquarters, where he spent his afternoons, learning his father's company with the same patient attention he gave his lesson plans. Devon's Tuesday and Thursday dinner visits became standing appointments. Familiar evenings of basketball talk and shared memories over Raymond's improving attempts at cooking. Devon was the one person who knew everything, who had watched the whole story unfold, and who understood why Raymond chose to keep teaching. The library fundraiser where Raymond met Adrienne had been Devon's suggestion. You need to be around normal people doing normal things. Adrienne was 37, a public defender who lived in a small rented bungalow and drove a 10-year-old Subaru. She talked with her hands when she got excited about constitutional law. She borrowed books from the library instead of buying them. She had no idea Raymond could have purchased the entire library building without blinking. He was in no hurry to tell her. He watched how she treated waiters, how she spoke about her clients, how she handled disappointment. He was learning who she was the way Walter had learned who Raymond was, through actions, not announcements. Over a recent dinner, Devon mentioned casually that he'd heard through the coaching network that Deshaun Pruitt was selling insurance from a strip mall office in Cordova. Raymond nodded, reached for the pitcher of sweet tea, and asked Devon about the team's upcoming playoff game. He hadn't thought about Deshaun in months. Denise had landed in corporate HR at a mid-sized healthcare company, renting a townhouse in Germantown. She had tried calling once, 6 months ago. Raymond hadn't answered. That was the entirety of the space she occupied in his life now. Monday morning found Raymond at his whiteboard, outlining key figures of the civil rights movement. A student raised her hand and asked about the leaders who worked behind the scenes, the ones who built foundations and infrastructure that others would later stand on. Raymond turned from the board. He thought about his father walking that postal route for 32 years, building something invisible and enormous. He thought about carrying that casket, not knowing he was also carrying a legacy of quiet power. The most dangerous person in any room, he said, is the one who doesn't need you to know how powerful they are. The bell rang. Class began. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.